Welcome, everybody. We're now live on all of the dear platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Rabbi Chernitsky, Director of Chabad Newfoundland based in St. John's. Nice to meet you, if I don't know you yet. You are tuned into the weekly Wednesday night Parsha class. This week, we finished the book of Genesis Bereshis with the last Parsha of the book, Parshas Vayechi, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt the last years of his life. We are going to focus today on something very special, and that's at the beginning of the parsha, the discussion, the back and forth between Jacob and Joseph, his son, about where should Jacob be buried. Now, is a parent a loving parent, or does a father need to be the leader who's not stooped down to the level of the child by higher than the child? And same thing with a leader. On the one hand, both are right. On the one hand, the parent has to be the role model, be higher than the child, show the child where they could reach, the expectations, show expectations, demand expectations. On the other hand, the parent also has to be able to go down to the child at the level of the child, and sometimes temporarily reduce expectations to help the child get out of whatever situation they're struggling, dealing with at the moment. So we need to do both, and that plays out in our parsha. Right? So we say it's not enough to have the parent who says, you're in point A, you need to be at point B, but also into the parent that shows the way, comes down to the child, comes down to point A and says, I'm going to help you get to point B. Instead of saying, look at me, I'm point B. I was like you, but look how far I've gotten. We say, look, you could also, you could do it, and I'm going to help you do it, and I'm going to come down to point A for you. The thing is, though, what's the challenge? Where do we struggle as parents, as leaders? Is that the two jobs are contradictory. Number one, showing the goal, means that where the child is right now, point A, is not good. We're saying this is not good, you should be at point B. Job number two, to help them get there, implies that you give them legitimacy to where they are right now, right? Yet, as difficult as it might be, we need to bring the two jobs together, and this is how we begin our Parsha class. Right at the beginning of the Parsha, we have one of the most difficult questions the whole Tanakh and the whole Bible. Jacob asked his son Joseph to swear, and not just to swear, because at the time, this is before the Torah was given, the holy objects we have today, tefillin, a Sefer Torah, like it says in the Talmud, that a person could take a shavua, an oath, and swear while holding a Sefer Torah, but holding a tefillin, and then the oath is more powerful. It also places more awe upon the person taking the oath. I'm using the word oath and swearing interchangeably here. But before Torah was given, there was no tefillin, there was no, the way we have them today, there was no Torah scroll. What did they have? They had the bris milah, the male organ, right? When the circumcision took place, that was one of the holiest things. That was the few mitzvahs that were given at the time. And so Jacob asked Joseph, his son, to swear and to hold his bris, his Jacob's male organ while he swears. So number one, that in and of itself is very complicated according to Jewish law for a son to touch his parents' private parts. Even just to be together in a change room and dress is problematic halachically. And we see from Joseph's response, he says, "Anoiche seket varecha." First, Joseph didn't want to swear, and that implies holding the organ. He just says, "I'll just do, Father, what you were requesting. I will. I'm not gonna also hold on to your private part, or take the oath." But Jacob insists. Seemingly doesn't trust Joseph, and they said, "No, you have to swear." And that's what the Torah says. And what is he swearing to? He's swearing that he's going to take Jacob out of Egypt as soon as Jacob dies and bury him in Israel. That was Jacob's request. So the question is, of course, number one, he doesn't trust his own son. He's called Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous one. Doesn't the righteous person keep his word? But furthermore, we said to expect his son to do the oath by holding on to Jacob's private parts, that's very, it's a mind-blowing request. After Joseph acquiesces and he takes the oath, it says in the Torah that Jacob bows down to him. He bows down to his son. Where do we see such a thing? There's a mitzvah, there's a commandment for a son to honor his parents. It's inappropriate, seemingly very inappropriate, for a father to bow down to his own son. According to Jewish law, this is very complicated. And their exchange, the back and forth between Jacob and Joseph, explains a very deep philosophical debate. Right? Does the general go down first, or does he go down last together with the ship? Does the general stand at the front and say, and he says, "Look at me, you could become like me"? Or does he stand at the back, pushing everybody forward, and he's the last one to leave once everybody has been transferred, pushed off, moved along further down? That was their argument. What's real parenting? What's real leadership? And they were both right. The parent has, on the one hand, to be higher than his children, his or her children. He has to be the role model, not a friend. And the parent also has to do what's counterintuitive and be with the child wherever they are. Wherever they are. If they're struggling, even if they're not doing what they were supposed to do, they should never get the message, "You are not my child, you're a failure, you're no good, there's no chance for you, you're a lost case." Never, God forbid. You need to come down to the child and say to them, "I'm here for you. Where you are now is perfectly okay, and I'm going to help you go to where you're supposed to be." So we need to do both. We need to be close to our children, but also we need to be a step higher and be that role model that they need. This Parshas, the last Parsha in the book of Bereshit, we say goodbye to Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, and he has Joseph to do Chesed Shel Emes. Chesed Shel Emes means kindness of truth, which is the highest degree, the highest level of kindness that a person could do in this world for somebody else, which means the kindness we do with somebody who passed away, and it's called the Chesed Shel Emes, kindness of truth, because they can never repay us. So it's true kindness because you don't expect to be repaid in any way. Eina metzape tashum gmul, as Rashi says here. Rashi said in English. And Jacob asked Yosef to have such an emotional way that really anybody with a heart would acquiesce and agree to his request. So Jacob says, "I am asking from you, Joseph, a chesed shel emes, kinds of truth, that you should take my body, bury me in the land of Israel, even though I cannot pay you back." And he gives him three reasons, and this Rashi quotes the three reasons. We're going to analyze this a little bit deeper now. And we're going to ask why the three. So reason number one that Rashi quotes, Jacob says, "With divine prophecy, I see that the earth will turn into lice, kinim," right? In the plague of lice, a couple hundreds of years later. And he says that they're going to crawl under my body. I don't want that. So I don't want to be buried in Egypt. Reason number two, Jacob says, at the time of the resurrection of the dead, when Mashiach comes, Tches Mesim, the people that are buried outside of the land of Israel there's a lot of pain involved from them to end up in the land of Israel from the diaspora. And I want to avoid that. Now, whether the pain is literal because the body has to be dragged throughout tunnels under the earth, or the pain is a spiritual pain for not being in the land of Israel, that's irrelevant. The point is he doesn't want to go through that distress, so he wants to be buried in the land of Israel. And the reason number 3 is Jacob says, I don't want the Egyptians to turn me into an idol. Why? Because once Jacob moved down to Egypt to be with his son Joseph, the years of hunger came to a halt. The Nile River would come up again and water the earth in Egypt, and things started to grow, so people had what to eat. And so he didn't want the Egyptians to turn him into an idol. Now, the Good Aryeh, one of the commentaries on Rashi's commentary, he explains why Jacob had to give these 3 reasons, and one fits the other. So Jacob wanted to leave Joseph no choice but to bury him in the land of Israel. If the only concern Jacob had was kinim, that the earth in Egypt would turn into lice and didn't want them crawling under his body, Joseph would say, well, I will bury you in a casket. In a casket, that's not an issue. That's why Jacob said the second reason, that he didn't want to be buried in the diaspora no matter what. Joseph says, not a problem. So we'll bring your body with us once we leave Egypt. Again, they had God's promise made to Abraham that after the 430 years, they will end up leaving Egypt, right? We had a class about that last year, about how the calculations work and how many years exactly, but they all know they're going to leave Egypt. So Joseph says, when everybody leaves, we'll take your body with us, which is actually what happened with Joseph's body himself. So Jacob said no. He gave the third answer. Doesn't want the Egyptians to turn him into an idol. I don't want to be in Egypt once I pass away, even for a second. And so he solved all the possible objections and the counters that Joseph could come up with. There's one more thing that we need to realize at how puzzling this back and forth is, and that is that there's a halacha. There's a law that mitzvah lekaim divri hameis. It's a mitzvah, it is a commandment to fulfill the words of somebody who's about to die. There's certain rules that are less strict, that are bent a little bit for a person who's in his deathbed, and he makes certain requests about his inheritance, to whom he goes, things that if he were to be healthy, they wouldn't be they wouldn't be fulfilled, they wouldn't be valid, they wouldn't be bona fide. But if, God forbid, somebody in his deathbed, that's considered bona fide. So the question is, what's the logic? The commentators ask, what's the logic behind this halacha, this law, that it's a mitzvah that kind of makes? It's a mitzvah to fulfill the words of somebody who's in his deathbed. So the Shoel Meishiv says that it's part of the mitzvah, it's part of the content of chesed shalem, is doing kindness of truth that we do with that person, that they're going to pass away, they're not going to be able to pay us back. So part of that is that we help them do their last wishes. This is a beautiful story with the Maharshal. Marshal, the famous rabbi of the city of Prague in the 16th century, lived 500 years ago. The story goes, there was a young family with children. The husband got very sick, and before passing away, he asks his wife to take an oath that she will not marry another. Under pressure, she took on the oath. Unfortunately, after the husband passed away, she quickly realized she needs help. She needs to raise the children. Somebody has to run the house. Somebody has to bring in money. So she wants to get remarried. So she went to her rabbi, the rabbi of Prague, the Marshal. And the marshal says, yes, it's not a problem. You're allowed to remarry. So she gets married after the period of time that she has to wait after she became a widow. But the day after the wedding, she becomes terribly sick to the point that they think that she is about to pass away. So her relatives run to the marshal, who's the rabbi who allowed her to marry. They realize there's something spiritual here going on. So they said, "Please, you are the one who allowed her to remarry. Do something." So the Maharshal prayed, spoke directly to God, and said, "Please, we did exactly what it says in Jewish law. Let this woman live and have a good and healthy life." And that's what happened. What do we see? You see how powerful is the effect of an oath. Now, back to the parsha. We spoke about how Jacob asked Joseph to place his hand on Jacob's private part. That's like taking an oath while holding a holy object. Joseph didn't want to. Jacob pushes him, and Joseph does ultimately do so. From this reluctance of Joseph to do so, the Bahag, the Baal Lachas Gedolih says, from here we see that a person should not be in the bathhouse, today's terms in the mikvah, together with his father. Now, what was with Jacob buying down to his son Joseph? Also, we need to understand that. And at the end of the day, what it's all about is that Jacob needs Joseph to be strong against Pharaoh. Joseph has to ask permission from Pharaoh because Joseph is only second to the king, Mishan Lamelech, who's the one that runs Egypt, calls all the shots, Pharaoh. And if Joseph's going to bend like a twig, he's not going to have a backbone, a spine, then Jacob's request will not be fulfilled. Doesn't matter how much he pushes. So he makes Joseph swear, and he bows down to him to flatter him. And it's all because he so desperately wants to be buried in the land of Israel. And to touch upon something we said just a few minutes ago about how problematic it is for a father to bow down to his son, there's a few instances the Talmud mentions. It happened also during the times of the Rishonim and the early rabbis that the son became the teacher of the father. The law is, the halacha is that a son should stand up out of respect for his father and mother. And there's a question in the Talmud that goes unanswered about what happens if the son becomes the father's teacher. Who stands up for whom? Because you're also supposed to stand up for your main teacher. And the Talmud doesn't answer the question. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Osher, he has an interesting life. He was a Sephardi, who was Ashkenaz, who became the rabbi of Ashkenaz of Sephardi, Spain. But be that as it may, the Rosh writes that his teacher, the Maharam of Rutenberg, he was in that situation. The Maharam's father became the Maharam's student, and the Maharam moved to a different city to avoid that quandary. And here, Yosef Tzaddik, Joseph the Righteous, his father bows down to him. How could that be? And so what the commentary says that nothing to do with Joseph himself. It was all to help him go to Pharaoh and get the permission. Right, so Joseph's gonna come to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's gonna say, "Why? Right? What do you need?" And Joseph says, "Well, I need permission to leave Israel, to leave Egypt to bury my father in Israel." So Pharaoh's gonna get offended. He says, Egypt was good for living here, but when it comes to burial, it's not good enough for you. And the Ramban Nachmanides adds that Pharaoh perhaps was concerned that Joseph will not come back. And he needs him. Joseph was the smartest person he knew. He needs him to lead the country, right? So Jacob's request went against went against Egypt, went against respect for the king, for Pharaoh. And so Jacob had to make sure that Joseph has what he needs to succeed. He made him swear, he bows down to him, and Joseph is empowered and compelled to carry his father's request. Rashi says something interesting. Rashi points out that the reason why Jacob wanted Joseph to swear, right? We said, why does he have to swear? He doesn't trust his son. Nothing to do with that. The reason why he makes him swear is because Joseph had sworn to Pharaoh that he will not tell anybody that there's one language that Pharaoh doesn't know. In the laws of Egypt, they used to say that the Pharaoh has to know every single language spoken in the world. But when Joseph came around, he realized, Pharaoh told him that there's a language that Pharaoh doesn't speak, Lashon HaKodesh, biblical Hebrew. So Pharaoh made Joseph swear that he would not tell anybody that Pharaoh doesn't speak the language. So, says Rashi, if Joseph would come to Pharaoh and say, my father asked him to bury him in Egypt, and so Pharaoh say, don't go, stay here. Joseph will say, what do you mean? I took an oath, I swore that I would do it, to take him out to bury him in the land of Israel. So Pharaoh says, tell him to fly a kite. I don't care about your oath schmoth. You ain't taking him. So then Joseph would say, well, you don't care about my oath to my father, then don't care about my oath to you that I swore not to tell anybody that you don't speak biblical Hebrew. So because of that, he couldn't get out of it. Pharaoh couldn't get out of it, and he agreed to the request. All right. Skipping here. The challenge, Jacob's challenge, is that he knew that Joseph's going to ask his own children, Joseph, he's going to ask his own children to bury him in Egypt and only to carry him out once the Jews leave Egypt over 100 years later, 200 years later, which is the opposite of what Jacob wants. What did Jacob want? Don't live in Egypt even for a second. Bury me in the land of Israel. Joseph says, when the Jews will leave Egypt later on, that's when they will take me with them. Why? Because Joseph says that if he had a choice, he would bury his father in Egypt too. And that's why Jacob was so scared and makes him take an oath that no, you're not going to bury me in Egypt. What's the argument? The argument is, what's the job of a leader? Does the leader jump off the boat first, or does he jump off last and go down with the boat? Jacob says that if I stay here, I, Jacob, the leader, the patriarch, we're going to get used to it. We're going to sink into Egypt, the Egyptian lifestyle, the exile. Then nobody want to leave later on. So the leader has to get up and announce that the diaspora is not a place for a Jew. A Jew needs to be in the land of Israel. You can't even be buried in the diaspora. Joseph says, if you, Father Jacob, if you just show them the destination, say, really, you should be in the land of Israel, who's going to take them from Egypt to Israel? Who's going to show them the way there? Who is staying behind to show people the way? Right? After Jacob and his children pass away, the slavery begins, and Joseph says, people are going to forget about Israel. They just want to live normally. Who's going to care about Israel? Who's going to have the strength to persevere? So Jacob says, you have to give them that strength. The leader has to stay with the people. And it's specifically Joseph could come to this realization because he suffered so much throughout his life. He lost his mother when he was young. His brother sold him. He went through all these tribulations in Egypt. But at the end of the day, the whole point of the exile was to lead him to become the second to the king, the Mishnah Lamelech. But for all of that to happen, for that growth, for that maturity to happen, the teacher has to be with the people. The leader has to be with the people. And that is what is going on in between the lines in our parsha. There is no conclusion here. Both were right, as we said at the beginning. The father, the leader, both has to be the poster boy, be the role model, be higher than the child, be higher than the people. On the other hand, he also has to be able to come down to them, to their level, and show them how you are going to help them to go from A to B. What do you think? We'll finish with a quick story, and then we'll see you next week. Moshe Herrenstein, he's a Chabad Chassid who lives in Israel. When he was a young man, he was traveling from Israel to New York for a wedding, but the flight back was on Friday. The other way around. He was flying from... He landed right. He was supposed to land back in New York. So he was in New York, flew to Israel for a wedding, and then flew back to New York, and the flight landed on a Friday. The flight is supposed to land on Friday. Of course, Friday night is Shabbat, where you can't be on a plane, you can travel by car. But it was a summer day. Sundown is very late. And he had 5-6 hours from between landing and Shabbat starting, so it was perfect. He had a chance to go to Israel for his family's wedding. He was able to get back to New York before Shabbat. Wonderful. As Hashem's sense of humor goes, where the plane is unable to land in New York, some weather issue, they start going around and around the airport until finally they take a detour and land in Boston. They land in Boston. He says, okay, I'll spend Shabbat in Boston. Again, still a few hours to Shabbat. But they don't open the doors. They don't let them get off the plane. What's going on? They said, we're not getting off in Boston. We're just waiting for things to clear up in New York. We'll go back to New York. Okay, so after an hour or two, they fly back to New York and land. Now, however, he lands 5 minutes before sundown. Frustrated, very upset at himself. Why did he take on such a flight, landing on a Friday? Of course, he will never do it again. But right now, it's Shabbat, and he's at the airport. What is he going to do? He walks to Brooklyn, which is allowed, by the way. It's all within the city boundaries. So he starts walking to Brooklyn. He goes to some relative's house, whatever it is, for the Friday night meal. And then Shabbat morning, Saturday morning, he goes to 770 Chabad Central, and he's participating in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's weekly talk, weekly sicha, weekly farbrengen, weekly gathering. So suddenly at the gathering, he hadn't said anything to the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, we have a guest here who's from Israel, and he's not in good spirits. He's not feeling happy about himself. He should make a lechaim, and he should know that everything will be well. So this Moshe Herrenstein, who was feeling awful, he was depressed, he was upset at himself, he was beyond himself. He says, at this point I realized that not only do I have a Rebbe, I also have a father. And this is the idea of both at the same time. On the one hand, the Rebbe demanded a lot from us. On the other hand, he's also our father, showing that love, showing that I'm here with you, and where you are is okay. He validates our experience, even though, of course, it's a lot higher, and it pushes us to be higher. Shabbat Shalom. Have a wonderful week. Catch you next week, Wednesday. All the best.